Our next panel is the Activism and Outreach panel, and I will go ahead and start introducing our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Abrar Umesh, who is a passionate public servant and community organizer who has served as a student advocate and student government official, teacher, older sister, and community member. She ran for the student position on the school board and lost by a single vote. But you can make a change, guys, next time at being that single vote. To a candidate, she lost to a single vote, and there was 13 candidates, and it was a 3-round non-anonymous election convention. So it's kind of that's a lot of people for you to lose just barely by. She served as the president of the Superintendent's Advisory Council, where they carefully studied skills for 21st century learning and proposed implementation that contributed to the current FCPS Portrait of a Graduate. She's also served on 3 school board committees in the past, Advanced Academics, where she consistently advocated for additional resources for students who are disadvantaged and whose chances of success are undermined. One on student discipline following the tragic suicide of her fellow classmate and friend, sorry to hear that, led by his father and sparking necessary confrontation for our country. And then finally, the third school board committee was for a superintendent selection committee, which contributes to the primary official role of the school board. In 2017, she announced her candidacy for the Fairfax County School Board. We're hoping that she gets elected soon in 2018. Hopefully your year will be 2018. Abrar is, I think it's modesty, you know, she's at Harvard. Just kidding. Yale. The one that's better. Her sister's at Harvard. I apologize. Her sister's at Harvard, she's at Yale. She's amazing. Okay, I will also introduce our speaker, Asha Noor. She's a racial justice and human rights activist, a peace building and conflict resolution specialist, educator, and writer. She currently is the programming and outreach director at CARE Michigan for Safe Spaces, the largest Muslim civil rights organization. Noor is the youngest board member for the Michigan Coalition of Human Rights and a representative from Muslim Arts Speakers Bureau. She is a fellow with the Detroit Equity Action Lab, a program of Wayne State Law School addressing structural and academic and systemic challenges in Detroit. She previously served as the advocacy and civic engagement specialist for National Take on Hate program. Noor has also worked both domestically and abroad in conflict zones, such as in places like Somalia, Brazil, Colombia, and Bolivia with marginalized communities, including women, Afro-Indigenous groups, refugees, religious minorities, and trauma victims. Before coming to Take on Hate, Noor worked with Islamic Relief USA, where she signed on to gain a larger understanding of international human rights issues. She holds a Master's of Science in Conflict Analysis and Resolution from George Mason University's School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, and a BA in Political Science from Michigan State University. Thank you for joining us, Asha Noor. Our third speaker is Ms. Tuka Nusayrat, and Ms. Tuka has over 10 years of experience working in Washington's policy community and as a deputy director at the Washington, D.C.-based International Affairs think tank. In her spare time, she volunteers for civic engagement and personal development programs at the Muslim American Society D.C. chapter, that's MAS. She holds a Master of Science degree from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and a Bachelor of Arts in Government and International Politics from George Mason University. A native of Northern Virginia, she grew up attending youth programs at Al-Hijrah Islamic Center. Let's do a round of applause for Ms. Tuka Nusayrat. She here? She's parking. And then our final speaker, she doesn't really need an introduction. That would be Dalia Mugahed. Hi, is that you? Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I was like, hi. She was like, salam alaikum. Okay, there she is. She really doesn't need an introduction, but Ms. Dalia Mugahed is the president and CEO of Mugahed Consulting, a Washington, D.C.-based executive coaching and consulting firm specializing on Muslim communities in the Middle East. You guys want to clap for her right now? Okay, that's fine. Give her some encouragement to come up here and take off her coat. Dalia Mugahed is a former executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, a nonpartisan research center that provided data analysis to reflect the views of Muslims all over the world. She's also a co-author of What Muslims Really Think with John Esposito. She's been selected as an advisor by the U.S. President, former U.S. President, and my favorite, Barack Obama, on the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Join me in a big, warm round of applause for our committee members. Finally, last but not least, is Ms. Fayza Dean, who is our moderator. She brings a wealth of experience in healthcare and law. She is born and raised in Guyana, and she has graduated high school from Toronto, Canada. She's international. And while attending Indiana University in the United States, she raised 3 children, ran the last remaining family-owned urgent care clinic in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and also attended Western Michigan Law School. She later practiced as a lawyer for 11 years in Indiana before moving to Falls Church, Virginia, now serving as the Deputy Outreach Director at Al-Hijrah and is an important public servant. We're very excited to have her. If you could please come forward. I'm going to turn it over to her just after reading a little bit about what ACT UP, ACT OUT is all about. So the term empowerment is used often to describe the modern woman. All over the internet, news channels and magazine covers, you can find Muslim women taking action towards positive change in their society, whether it be people like Ibtihaj Muhammad, Linda Sarsour, Margari Aziza, Hil Suad Abdul Khabir, or Halima Aden. Muslim women are not staying silent, including Dali Mogah, also should be on this list. They are giving society a piece of their mind. How can we find our passion for service, get involved and make a difference? Many women have passion for change, but they don't know where to start. This is where it starts, at this panel, and I hope that this panel will inspire us to tackle the much needed work in our community and society. Show us how to go beyond being an embattled community to actually thriving community. We don't want to just be embattled and defensive, and we're hoping that you guys will shed light on how to do that because of your own beautiful and inspiring stories. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So one of our first challenges as moderator is to make sure these fine ladies, our sisters, get a chance to tell you all the great things they're here to tell you today. So as you heard, this session is about acting up and acting out. And so it's very fitting at this time. I know you've had a break, but I'm going to ask you to do something because I looked around and I didn't recognize some of the faces. I do recognize some faces from Dar al-Hijrah and Maz, but not everybody. So I'm going to ask you to do something, and I'm going to ask you to stand up and look around you. If you could please indulge me. This section is called Act Up and Act Out. So our first acting up and acting out will be, can you please stand up and look around and find someone that you don't know? I want you to find someone that you don't know. I want you to greet them and tell them why you're here. You have 1 minute.
That was
30 seconds, tell that person why you came.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. We're out here now.
You can take your seats now, thank you.
Okay, I feel like we would have had to connect it. But I had...
Thank you, you can take your seats now. Congratulations, everyone. You have taken the first step to becoming ambassadors of your deen, ambassadors of your faith. Thank you so much. We are starting to act up and act out. This is great. So the Outreach and Government Affairs Department at Dar al-Hijrah and Mass, we collaborate a lot on interfaith interfaith events and outreach events and government affair events with one of our largest interfaith partners called Voice. Who knows what Voice is? Put your hand up. Not too many, but Voice is Virginians Organized for Interfaith Civic Engagement. So what do? What you just did, they actually have a 3-day training that teaches you how to converse, how to relate to leaders in your community. I'm sorry? I can get that to you later. February 1st, the next session. Who would be interested in going to a 3-day session on learning how to talk to the leaders in your community? Who would be interested? Put your hand up. Somebody take a picture of that, please. So yes, Voice is one of our interfaith partners. A few months ago, at Al-Hijrah, we mobilized about 200 Muslims in buses, cars. We carpooled. How many of you were there for the 200 voice action? Great. And mass, I think, mobilized 100 people. That's 300 Muslims in buses and cars. And we went to a big action that Voice had, and Voice is made up of about 55 different interfaith organizations, and Mass and Al-Hijrah had the most Muslims there. Congratulations, yay. Why is that important was 300 people took their time out of their weekend, got on a bus because they were interested in meeting their local politicians, their local delegates. And why is that? They were there to hold those politicians accountable for issues that happen to us every day. Issues like affordable housing, hate acts in the school for our kids that are getting their hijab pulled off, policies within our school systems, immigration issues. Does anybody know anybody with an immigration issue? Put your hand up. Okay. So there were these politicians and delegates, and here we were participating in one of the largest 1,500 mobilized effort. And yes, I have 2 minutes. I got that. Great. So we're here today as sisters, and I see some brothers in the audience, to be more civic-minded, right? So MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., for those of you that don't know MLK yet, once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Sisters, when you discover that visceral moment in your life, and what does that mean? That something in your life that wakes you up, that you want to do something about it, call outreach or government affairs. Don't listen to your head and go back to bed. Call us. I do want to let you know that acting out and acting up, at first, it's not easy. But for some of us, it just comes naturally. I want to share one story, and then I'll give up the stage. The other day, I was having a meeting with my new outreach director, Imam Beg. He's sitting over there. And he said, "Fayza, did you know you sent me an email at 3 a.m.? And I said, "It wasn't 3 a.m.? And that's how I work. In outreach, if something like pops in your head and you just want to put that thought down because you don't want to miss that opportunity the next day, or I have to be at 7:30 in the morning, I'm like thinking about it and wanting to do it and not putting it off. So on that note, I have a lot more to tell you, but I'll save it for later. I would like to Sister Tuka to come up and tell you a little bit more about acting up and acting out.
Assalamu alaikum. First, I'd like to thank Sister Fayza for putting together this great panel, and I just want to shout out to all the volunteers and all the people who've been working really hard on this conference. I know from organizing conferences that this is a lot goes on behind the scenes, so please do take a moment to make dua for them, and may Allah reward them immensely. And roll up your sleeves, so the next conference you're going to be in their place and you're going to be volunteering, because it takes a lot of effort and it takes a collective effort. So I was asked to speak about how we can think globally and act locally. And some might still, in this day and age, question why we should even think about global issues when we have so many issues here in our own country, and that rightly so. First and foremost, as humans, it hurts us to watch the suffering of people around the world and stay silent about it. So it's just in our nature to care about what other people are going through. As Muslims, the Messenger, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, reminds us, and he says, the example of believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for each other is that of a body. When one limb aches, the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever. So we do have this connection, and we have this responsibility to care about people around the world who are suffering. And third and foremost, or third and is a really important point, is that we are in a position of privilege and power as Americans. We are citizens of the most powerful country in the world, and that in and of itself is enough to move us to act, because a lot of people do look to us to make a difference. So now that we know the various reasons what motivates us to be involved in these issues, it might be really overwhelming for us. Every day we hear of a new international crisis that we want to make a difference in, but we're not sure where to start. So I'm going to try to give you 3 steps that you can take to really make a difference on any issue that you are passionate about and you're concerned about around the world. So number 1, educate yourself about the issue. Social media is a place to start, but it's not the ending. You can't learn about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the Syrian conflict from an Al Jazeera Plus video. That's maybe a place where you can get started and get a little backgrounder, but there are more valuable resources out there for you to educate yourself. If you're standing in a protest and someone says, Palestine was never even established as a state, how are you going to reply if you don't know any facts and you're only there based on, maybe you're going there for a reason, you're emotionally vested in the issue, but you're very lacking any knowledge about the issue itself. So you need to be really versed in that knowledge. Nobody's saying you have to be an expert in every international issue, but if there's one issue that you choose and you want to be an advocate for it, you need to educate yourself on it. We still have books. There's all this talk about fake news. Fake news existed before Donald Trump came to power. So be wary of all the sources and the outlets that you listen to, and be mindful of what are the right sources for me to pursue that knowledge. Number 2, learn how policy is made. Talk to people who are in policy. Reach out to people who are policymakers. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to network with you and talk to you and go beyond the surface of the United States likes to go to war in all these countries. Every policy is made differently. Some policies are made in the White House, some policies are made on Capitol Hill, and some policies are made before a person joins an administration. And there's a lot of motivations behind each policy. It's very hard if one person tells you that this policy was made because of one reason. That's something that's not true at all. There are many reasons that motivate policymakers to go a certain way. So it can be a personal ideology, it can be an ideology that they share with somebody else, it can be geopolitical. So the reason that George W. Bush went to Iraq for questionable purposes, some people might have thought, okay, well, we don't want the same to happen in the next administration in Syria. There are many reasons why policy happens and is formed. So you need to dig deeper beyond just the headlines and look at how a similar policy was made abroad. And even sometimes with all the access in the world, if you are the most passionate person about an issue, and I've worked with people who are very passionate about, for example, the cause in Syria, and they had access to the highest levels of government, and they were still not able to make a huge difference because there was a president who came in, for example, and had a personal interest in not engaging the United States in another war in the Middle East, for example. So there are many reasons, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be involved. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't make our voice heard. And the third reason is the third step is that you're armed with the knowledge about the issue, you're armed with knowledge about how policy is made, where can you get started? You're not going to go and knock on the doors of the White House. You're going to go to your local representatives, and that's where we have to start. We've made a lot of progress in 1 year since the Women's March, since the inauguration of President Trump. We've made a lot of progress in our community about how we can get involved, why we need to call our representatives when there's an issue related to health care, to immigration. We can't just care about the issues that concern us. When we were targeted by the Muslim ban, we saw people from all walks of life come out to support us. And that's how things change here. You have to hold hands with other people. You have to go out and speak out for other causes so that people can come and support you when your cause is of concern. We have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable as members of a democracy and as Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ says, the whole of Islam is about sincerity and advice, ad-deenun nasiha. And the companion said, to whom? And he said, to God and his book, to the Prophet, and to the leaders and general public. And this is a hadith that many people point towards our responsibility to hold people accountable. And so when I'm calling my representative, I'm thinking about that hadith. I'm making my intention that I am going to make this community better. I'm going to make my country better by being more involved. Know who your representatives are, pay attention to those issues, and if you're still wondering why you need to make an effort to be involved, to act out and speak out, I'll leave you with one reminder and one hadith again from the Prophet ﷺ. He says, whoever encounters evil, he should try to change it with his hand. Otherwise, if he's not able to, then with his tongue, and if he's not able to, then with his heart by denying it and making a prayer. So I hope that we will all come out of this conference more motivated, more engaged, and willing to take more of our time and invest it in learning about the issues, learning how policy is made, and tapping into our local government and representatives so that we can have a policy that impacts issues that happen outside of our borders. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I forgot a preliminary matter. If you have questions, it's better for you to write it down. And if you want to hear from a specific speaker up here, please write that on your question as well. Our second speaker will now be Abrar Omish. Sister Abrar Omish, thank you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. I'm incredibly excited to be amongst all of you guys, and jazakumullah khair to all the organizers and everyone who put effort into this conference. Inshallah, today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about oh, sorry, thanks. Okay. So I was asked to discuss a little bit about why one should get engaged politically and why I ran in the first place. And inshallah, I want to start off by talking about, and you'll understand what this is about in just a second. So overall, I want to first go over why one should even consider running. What is our Islamic understanding of that? And inshallah, I want to give you some practical steps. MashaAllah, the organizers were very practically minded and made sure to push us to give you guys tangible things to do. And then inshallah, I want to go into some of the challenges that actually come with Muslims working in public service, because I think that's the most important thing for us to discuss as Muslim women in this room. Okay. So first and foremost, this is actually... So when we look to understand from our deen why it's important to be engaged politically, of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, I'm sure many of you have heard this verse before, whether it was misused or not, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. That you are the best ummah that was brought onto people. You call for the good and you turn others away from the evil. What does that mean? There's a responsibility that comes with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us to be to uphold justice and to be witnesses for Him before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for justice on earth. And what more, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He put us as stewards, as khalifa. إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ khalifa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to be stewards on this earth. Can you imagine the vision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created humankind to populate this earth and take care of it? Not only as the planet, but also of the humanity that's on it. So it's incredibly important to think of our role as a khalifa on this earth And that's essentially why we engage in the community and we want to build this earth with what's beautiful and what's most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in terms of specific things I want to make sure you guys know about so that you can have some takeaways, inshallah, for moving forward. Those of you who are interested in engaging politically, there are organizations around us, particularly in this community, is the community that I know, whether they're political action committees, PACs. I see some representatives in the audience from these organizations themselves. There's something called the New Dominion PAC, which is Arab Americans who want to be politically engaged. The Southern Business Council, who are just Muslim Americans who want to be engaged. These organizations empower young people who are interested in being involved in these circles to meet the right people, to get the right training. Emerge Virginia. I highly encourage any of you in this room who want to be involved in politics to consider doing some of that training. If you're in high school, there's something called the Student Advisory Council. There's something called the Student Human Rights Commission. These are all government bodies where we can have a voice and where we can be involved in our communities. Of course, if you're an adult, I'm going to assume everyone here who's a citizen votes, inshallah. But another thing is party membership. There are so many elections and different conventions that occur that determine policy within our very county that we don't have any say in because we're not involved in the party. And I can attest to the fact that there are probably like 2 or 3 Muslims registered in the Fairfax County Democratic Committee right now. And so when elections come around, when things like the Lake Braddock student who had her hijab pulled off in school, when Bijan Ghaisar, if you guys remember, who was shot by the police unjustly, or when something like what happened with Nabra, may Allah have mercy on all of their souls, happens, this is exactly the problem. We come, we want to be loud, we want to be active, but we don't have a say because we're not politically signed up and we're not registered in the places we need to be to make sure we have that voice. So I highly encourage anyone who lives within Fairfax County to sign up, and there's more information. You can talk to me about that afterwards. So that's in terms of the tangible things you guys can do to get involved. Everyone's probably heard the expression politics is dirty. Obviously, some people say politics is haram, this and that, and of course it's a challenge. So I want to ask a question to the audience. So sometimes when you're in politics, people tell you have to lie. You always have to lie, you have to be a politician, whatever, so that you can get somewhere. And the idea is you kind of just white lies here and there so that you can get to your position, and then inshallah, when you have power, you can change it and do good things, and overall that's going to be great for the Muslim community, okay? So I wanted to ask the audience, who thinks that no matter what, even if you lose an election, you shouldn't do any of that? Raise your hand. Okay. But, okay. So redo the question. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so in politics, you're going to face scenarios where it's going to be very easy for you to want to be deceptive, to want to lie, to want to be a little shady. Anyone who, anyways, okay. So in those cases, you want to do it for the greater good, right? Because ultimately, your goal is to get into power, and through having power, you want to pass good legislation to serve people and ultimately serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? So how many of us are comfortable with that idea? Nobody thinks, okay, I see some hands. Right, because ultimately you're going to go and you're going to do better things for the community. Okay. Well, I'm glad I'm going to call you out right now. Okay, so, one of the things I want to mention is actually when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions being a khalifa in the Quran, every time, it's actually really interesting. I pulled out every reference of this. Every single time, immediately following, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about kufr, or talks about people who will be misled, or talks about the temptations that will lead us to completely go astray and follow our own desires and our own caprice was the proper translation, but essentially our hawa. And that's an incredibly important thing to keep in mind, that ultimately, if our goal is the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through politics, then we have to make sure we're spiritually enriched, that we are spiritually educated as well, that we educate ourselves in the deen, because if our goal is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason why we're on earth, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us on this earth to serve Him, ultimately. Does it make sense that we would have to violate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's code to accomplish the goal of serving Him? So that's an important line of thought that I encourage all of you guys to think about. I'm totally being called on time. I had a lot more to share with you guys, but please do reach out if this is something you're interested in. If you are interested in policy or politics in any way, there's a lot we need to talk about. So jazakumullah khair.
Wow. If politics is not your cup of tea, how many mothers are in the audience? Mothers. I want you to know that if politics is not your cup of tea, please join us for a Taste of Islam in fashion show. Join us for an opportunity to invite your neighbors, your co-workers, your friends, people of other faith, to come into your mosque and enjoy a cup of tea under a tent and explain Islam 101. If that's not your cup of tea, you can join me at the, Falls Church Parade, where we stand up with the Citizens Against Gun Violence. And if you want to think a little bit harder about that, who remembers Sandy Hook? Put your hand up real high if you remember Sandy Hook. How many kids were killed? 20. 20 kids were killed. That's about firearms, availability of firearms. And what Abrar is saying is there's a way to get involved, and there's different ways to get involved. Sister Tuka told you some ways. But there's many other local ways you can get involved with us at Dar Al-Hijrah and Mass and start at a more local level and just get a taste of Islam. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Asha Noor.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I mean, I know we're all tired, but can we try to be a little bit louder? Assalamu alaikum. Okay, because if I have to be up here, I gotta feel the energy. I can't be here in a really low energy space because it's not my vibe. So I really want to thank Dar Al-Hijrah for putting together this amazing conference. Growing up in this community, I don't think that I would have anticipated having a women's conference. So I'm really kind of proud of this community for putting this together and really coming towards the forefront of sort of addressing progressive issues. Again, I grew up in Dar Al-Hijrah, about 30 seconds away from the mosque, because my dad was really adamant about getting the house right across the street from the mosque. So it was literally a second home, so it really feels like a 360 moment to be able to come back to the community and kind of share some of the work that I've been doing outside in different spaces. So I was tasked with a very specific question today, actually a set of specific questions, to discuss racism, activism, and social justice. One of them, the specific questions, was around racial injustice and addressing bias, and how do you figure out if you're having that in your community? And I think that it's a really wonderful question. However, I think that you can address that question in an entire conference and not a 10-minute sort of panel discussion, right? We're already getting the time. So I think that it's really important to first address that there's an issue. Again, growing up in this community, I can't even remember as a young child having these discussions in the mosque, talking about race or identity. I think it's become more of a current sort of issue. And this isn't to single out this community, it's an issue across all Muslim spaces. Usually there'll be some sort of issue, they'll call in an expert, they'll address it, put it under the rug, and that's fine. And I think as a community, we've really adopted a very dangerous ideology of colorblindness where we act like we don't see color. How many of you in this room have heard people say, I don't see color, I don't see race? Right? I mean, how do they drive? They're definitely lying. I know that they see color and I know that they see race, but they really want to avoid accountability. They don't want to address these deep structural issues that impact us globally and nationally. So what they do is they use that as a cop-out. And it really minimizes the real grievances of communities of color, including our community. But however, our faith is not a colorblind one. If it was, then we wouldn't see race or the tribe or ethnicity of the early followers. We wouldn't know where they came from or their stories. It would have been omitted from all sacred texts. So why is it that sometimes black Muslims within the community, if they claim that an action was racist, Muslims naturally respond and say things like, oh, well, Islam is a religion that does not condone racism, and there is no racism in Islam. I mean, how many times have we heard that? Right? I mean, I know I've heard it my whole life. I feel like there's a lot of feedback. And so I think, we have to be able to address this issue and realize that, yes, in Islam there is no racism, but at the end of the day, Muslims can and are at many times very racist. And I do feel like there is a slow shift in our community towards the right direction to be able to address these issues and ask some really serious questions, challenge the status quo, and push for reform in some very unlikely spaces. Again, this brings me to a very universal concept, one that has helped shape me. In life, we all have challenges, and ultimately with those challenges, we have to make some difficult choices. And based off of those choices, we are left with an outcome. I was actually birthed in a really big challenge, in a conflict. I was only 3 months old when the civil war broke out in Somalia, and so my parents had to make a really difficult decision and have to come to this country and rebuild their lives. And so that was just one of the many challenges that I had to face in my life. One that I faced later on was something that many of us in this room kind of went through, which was growing up around the time of 9/11 and having our identities kind of shaped by what the media or what Hollywood was saying. How many of you remember the exact place and time you were when 9/11 happened? Right? So it was a really pivotal moment, I think, especially for some of us who are younger, who are maybe in middle school, elementary school, high school, and really having our identity formulated. And so I think that those years are very critical for formulating who you are. And when you're having something so constant, such as Islamophobia, in the media, in every facet of life, it really becomes a daunting issue. But at that time, it wasn't just a singular issue. It wasn't something that I was going through. It was a community challenge. And we all collectively felt that otherization. I remember growing up in Al-Hijrah and having issues of FBI, surveillance, having, the casual stop by your house and see what you're up to. So I think that as a community, many of us were fortunate enough to wake up and realize that, okay, we are facing some serious challenges and we have to make some choices. And I think that has mentally prepared many of us to address these issues, but there's still a lot of kind of people holding out on this faith of this American dream, sort of this idea of transcending race or transcending, some of these issues. And I think that that's something, ideology that we have to really move beyond. Because at the end of the day, we know that this country was built on a settler colonialist project. We know that it was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. We know that there's been so many atrocious things that's happened. So I don't understand when people wake up and say, how could Trump be doing this? This is so un-American, the Muslim ban, immigration issues. It's actually not un-American, it's as American as apple pie. And it's so difficult when I'm talking to Muslims to kind of get them to understand that this isn't something new and this is something, unfortunately, that our country was built upon. So I will leave you with this one point because I have the time police right here, right? So I know that I've talked about a couple of challenges that we have collectively faced as a community, whether it be intra-racism within our own community or issues that we're facing collectively as a community. So I just want to ask you, if you're put in a situation of oppression and you have the ability to stand up, will you be able to make that choice and overcome this narrative that we just keep our head down, we keep it moving, we try to be the best that we can be? Will you be able to actually stand up against oppression? Thank you.
So as women, we face a multitude of challenges every single day. It is time to take control. It is time to act up and act out. It is time to welcome our challenges, and it's time to eat challenges for breakfast. On that note, I welcome Dalia, Sister Dalia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد. Assalamu alaikum. First, I want to thank the organizers of this conference for their courage, for their vision. This is, I think, the first time in this region that we've had a Muslim Women's Conference. And I'm so honored to be here speaking with this amazing panel. I want to set the stage for what I'm going to share with you. I have two broad themes that I want to develop. And they are encapsulated in two ayahs that I often reflect on when I'm going through tough times in my life. The first is, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you except as an act of compassion to all the worlds. And the other is, إِنِّي جَعَلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. I will put on earth a vicegerent or a servant leader. And it is these two concepts that I think we have to answer the call for. We are being called as Muslims to lead with compassion and service at a time when we may feel under siege and victimized. What I hope to do is to turn that around to a feeling, to a vision, to an understanding of having been chosen to be in this place, in this moment in history, by God. Call to an ethical movement where it is going to be on us to save our country from itself. You know, we recently celebrated the legacy of Martin Luther King. He and Malcolm X are often considered the leaders of the civil rights movement. And as they often talked about, it's interesting, we grow up in school hearing that it's called the civil rights movement, and yet when you look at the rhetoric of the very people leading this movement, they very seldom use these words. I always thought that was interesting. The words they used were freedom and justice, a lot more often. You almost never hear civil rights. And I'm not sure why we've rebranded it to something that sounds so much less dangerous. It was about freedom and justice. I was 15 years old when I stumbled on this book in my school library. This was a very long time ago where I really didn't know a whole lot, and not that that's the case, that's still the case now, but there just wasn't a lot of mainstream information about Islam in America. It wasn't something that was discussed in our conferences. It wasn't, there weren't documentaries on TV. It wasn't something everyone knew. And so I was so blown away and taken aback when I saw this book about a man who had transformed his own life, that of his community, and in fact, his country and the whole world through the power of his ideas and his faith. And to my shock, this amazing American leader and I shared the same religion. This was the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And this was such a transformative moment for me to read this book. It was truly the day that I went from being a Muslim in America to being an American Muslim. Because in this story, I understood how indigenous Islam was to this country. That it was held in the hearts of explorers that predated Columbus, in the hearts of enslaved Africans who built this country, and to the many more immigrants from every other country that brought Islam to this country to help build and shape it. So this whole idea about feeling welcomed has gotten very irritating for me. And I actually get offended now when I hear Muslims telling me that they don't feel welcomed. And as well-intentioned as they are, I'm also a little offended when I hear good-meaning allies saying that they welcome Muslims. Only a guest waits for a welcome, and this is your home. We are not waiting to be welcomed. We built this country. So both of these great Black leaders fought for human rights and equality for all people, both inspired by their deeply held religious convictions that call on us to stand for justice and freedom. And that applies now just as much as it ever did. Now, I'm going to address what might be a question for some people, no one in this room. But it's always worth at least acknowledging that for a lot of people, I'm the last person dressed the way I am to be talking about freedom and justice. A lot of people look at me and think I'm oppressed. I should be grateful for the opportunity to not dress this way, and yet here I am, so socialized to accept my second-class status that I have accepted this on myself when I can relinquish it in this great free country. In fact, my decision to wear hijab in my late teens was inspired by reading the Autobiography of Malcolm X. At the time, it was my feminist declaration of independence from the cultural pressures put on women to conform to an impossible and often Eurocentric standard of beauty. And I often tell people it has so many advantages. Wearing hijab, dressing like this, is like limitless in its advantages, but I'm just gonna name a few. So first of all, travel. We're all very stressed out when we're traveling. It's hard to travel. And for me, I almost always get a full body massage, care of TSA, just because I'm dressed like that. I also exceed expectations really easily. Like in meetings, all I have to do is open my mouth and speak English, and I'm like mind blown. Everybody's just amazed. But my favorite thing is I'm constantly getting compliments. Like in the summer when I'm outside, every other person will stop me and say, "You look hot." I'm like, thank you for noticing. I have been working out. So today, my daily decision to be so visibly Muslim in a time of rampant Islamophobia is just about putting conscience over conformity. Doing what I believe in, even when it's not popular. And I'm not alone. I am not special in any way. At ISPU, where I work, we found in a nationwide study of Muslims that while Muslim women, bear the brunt of Islamophobia, they're also more likely than anyone else to respond with resilience and solidarity. So I thought it was really interesting that although Muslim women are more likely than Muslim men to say they've experienced personally discrimination for their faith, they're also more likely to say that they are personally afraid. Half of Muslim women after the election said that they feel personally unsafe from attacks from white supremacists and other hate groups. And yet, despite this, despite the fact that they're more afraid, more anxious, report more discrimination. I thought I had 30 minutes. Okay, that's a big change, but no problem. Despite the fact that they are bearing this brunt, they are no more likely than Muslim men to say that they're hiding their identity because of it. And instead, they're responding by taking self-defense courses. by joining civic organizations and by donating more than ever to Muslim organizations fighting for their rights. So any organization that's alienating women, that's just a strategic mistake. And it is this very idea that is at the heart of the legacy of these two great leaders. Martin Luther King said, "The hope of a secure and livable world lies with disciplined nonconformists who are dedicated to justice, peace, and brotherhood." It will be, as unlikely as it may seem to many, many people, it will be Muslim women who will lead us in this coming stage. Now, I'm going to skip to the end where I tell you what we're going to do next. I have 6 things I think we should do. And here's the cliff notes. We have to start inside. This is how Muslims, this is what makes us different. This is our superpower. Our superpower is that we know nothing gets done unless you do your inner homework. Unless you cannot do an outer struggle until you've done the inner resistance that has to happen. And that means freeing ourselves before we can free anyone else, freeing ourselves from our ego, from our arrogance, from our need for recognition, from our attachment to outcomes. As important as the work is, the first step is to understand that it is not up to you. All you have to do is obey the Creator. The outcomes are in His hands. Number 2, we need to replace our fear and those of our fellow Americans with facts. We need to educate ourselves and those around us with facts. And that begins with the idea that when we're addressing an audience, even if they're hostile, we have to go into that setting believing in our hearts, just like the Prophet ﷺ, that we are there to deliver a gift, not to take anything from them. We are not there to ask for approval. We are not there to conquer an enemy. We are there to generously share a gift. Everyone around us is our equal. They are not overlords to appease, and they are not enemies to conquer. They are just people struggling just like us. We have to see their humanity and relate to them as simply wanting to offer a gift. We have to remain outraged. This is really important because I already see how easy it is to get lulled into accepting the status quo and the outrageousness of what is happening as the new normal. It's a natural coping mechanism that human beings have, but we have to resist it. We have to stay outraged and hold normal as what is actually normal, not what is being fed to us as the new normal. The way that our leadership is behaving is not normal. And let's stay angry about it, and let's channel that energy into action. And that action has to be to organize across color and creed. Very simple example, just as one thing to make you think and to drive this point home. In New York City, I was just there last weekend, amazing city, love being there. New York City had 2 very problematic policies. The NYPD, the largest police force in the country, right? 2 very problematic policies. One was called stop and frisk, okay? What that meant was they could, for absolutely no reason, stop someone and frisk them, just walking down the street. Now, to the shock of many of you, sarcasm here, the people who were targeted just happened to be people of color, young men mostly, who were Black and Latino. They also had this other wonderful policy, which was mass surveillance of Muslims for, again, absolutely no reason except for the fact that they were Muslim. Now, these two groups have a lot of overlap, okay? A lot of Muslims are also black, and a lot of Muslims are also Latino. But there's also a lot of Muslims who aren't. And unfortunately, non-black Muslims weren't always thinking in terms of who do we ally with to fight the same enemy. But in this case, these two circles, which do overlap, actually came completely together and formed a coalition of 67 organizations that fought both of these policies at the same time, and they won. That's the power of coalition building. We need to support other women. I'm talking to the women and the men in the room. Here's how you support other women. This is not hard at all. You talk about them behind their back. This is how you do it. Did you know that Amani built the most amazing website you've ever seen? Did you know that she took a really difficult stance and turned down an award from Revlon? That's supporting women. You talk about them behind their back. You brag about what they're doing. You amplify what they said. In a meeting, try this. This is amazing. This is what happens in a lot of meetings. This is not about Muslims or anything else. This is just male-female dynamics. Every meeting almost I've ever been in where there's, men and women together. A woman will really, this happens, please believe me, I'm not exaggerating. A woman will actually say something. She'll say an idea. It was like nobody heard it. Then the exact same thing is said by a man 30 seconds later, and it's like suddenly the most amazing idea that anyone's ever heard. Okay, this happens all the time. So what we have to do is sometimes it's like this 2-to-1 rule. Your sister says an idea. You repeat it. Wow, Aisha just said the most amazing idea. I really think we need to consider this. We have to amplify each other in a meeting so that we can be heard. And then finally, and I'll wrap up here, we need to take back our country. And I really love all the things that the previous speakers have said, but I have to re-emphasize this idea. We need to, at the very minimum, bare minimum, we need to vote. We need to vote. We need to vote on local elections. We need to vote on state elections, not just the federal. We need to vote. Now here's one response, very simple response to anyone, because as a researcher, Muslim Americans are the least likely faith community to be registered to vote. And these are among citizens, so it's not because some of us aren't citizens. We only ask those eligible, are you registered? Muslims are significantly less likely to be registered than others. Okay, so we ask them why. Why aren't you registered to vote? Here's the number one reason. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. Here's my response to anyone who says that. Why are they working so hard to keep you from voting through voter suppression laws if it didn't make a difference? They wouldn't work so hard to keep you from it if it didn't make a difference. And this isn't just now, this is for the entire history of our country. It makes a difference. This is you relinquishing your right to the benefit of no one except your enemies. So don't tell me it doesn't make a difference. So I'm going to wrap up by saying, in honoring the legacies of these two nonconformists, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, let's recommit ourselves to leading lives of struggle, not just sympathy, for those who are victimized by injustice. Thank you.
So on that note, I was just given a message that please write down your questions. We will try to answer them on social media. We are out of time. And I would like to leave you with this message after Sister Dalia. We as women are already leaders. please understand that you are, and if you were in the health section and you listened to Dr. Rashida, she mentioned that even men will go to her for advice. So know that each woman, each mother is already a leader. You're a leader of your sons, leader of your brothers, leader of your friends. As leaders, we stand in front of the pack. As leaders, we make no excuses. And as leaders, we get things done. It is time, my sisters, to join our forces and challenges and act up and act out. Thank you so much.